Ladies and gentlemen, the next session is DPS Spotlight, the legislative approach. Please welcome President of the New Common School Foundation, Clark Durant. Parent leader and education organizer of 482 Forward, Arlyssa Hurd. Education advisor to the governor of the state of Michigan, Karen McPhee. Chief Executive Officer of Excellent Schools Detroit, Dan Varner. And to moderate the discussion, anchor at WJBK Fox 2, Huel Perkins.
Thank you for being here. And since we have 50 minutes, I want to get this session started very early. And we're going to begin with Arlyssa Hurd, who has more skin in the game than anyone here. She actually has a child who is in the Detroit public school system right now. Arlyssa, what are the problems? How do we solve them?
Well, actually, I have a child who is now in charter school. So I have been a DPS parent, I am a charter school parent, and I was also a private school parent. For me and a lot of parents, inconvenience right now. I stay over towards the 6 Mile Livernois area, but my child goes to school on Shane and Mack. There is no transportation system, so I have to drive that every day. My son has special needs. He has ADHD. So a lot of times these kids are kind of difficult to educate, probably because a lot of folks just don't know what to do with them. We originally started out a good school that I felt family-oriented near my home. My oldest son went there. Problem is there were 45 kids in the classroom. And there were 6 or 7 more kids in that class that was just like my son. The teacher was by herself. But there was nothing we could do. I cried because I did not want to leave the school, but the principal's hands were tied. We couldn't get an additional 3rd grade teacher, and it was just chaos. And I think parents are experiencing this same kind of chaos on different levels every day. We've got folks that are driving 40 miles or so to take their kids to school. We have parents who have had schools closed in their neighborhood, so there are no schools there, so they have to go way on the other side of town if they have transportation. Then we also have other parents who, because of their limited resources, no transportation, and maybe not as fully aware, their children are trapped in some of the failing schools that all of a sudden popped up overnight. When nobody told us that we were going to switch from DPS to EAA. So we've got all of these issues happening at the same time. The house is on fire, and it's burning quickly.
And that's where Dan Varner comes in. Dan, you are with Excellent Schools Detroit, and you have been called both a savior and a devil because you have enlisted parents to go in and grade the schools to see how they're doing. A personal, first-hand look. What do you see?
Well, I see a lot of the same stuff that Arlyssa just described. The house is on fire and burning quickly. And let's be clear, like kids are in that house, right? And their futures are being determined, the trajectory of their lives is being determined by what's happening in our public education system today. And that is our collective responsibility. We all pay taxes to support public education. It's one of, we believe, the primary missions of government. And we're just failing miserably as a community, as a state, in delivering on that obligation. So there are a host of problems, many that Arlyssa just described that impact parents. You also have a host of problems that impact schools because there's no simple common enrollment system. Schools actually have a devil of a time predicting their enrollment. And of course, their budgets are built on enrollment. And if you don't know how many kids are going to walk in your door next fall, it's really difficult for you to budget appropriately and actually hire the right number of teachers in expectation of those students and the like. We have schools that are located all over the place, kind of willy-nilly, without any sense of order. And so I would offer this, kind of as a framework for the conversation. I completely understand and generally am a supporter of capitalism. I get that markets have incredible power, right? And we want to unleash that power to benefit our kids and our community and our education system. But creating an education marketplace is not the same thing as simply eliminating government from the marketplace. Like, we actually have to regulate in ways that create healthy markets. You have to regulate for safety. The reason that all of us are willing to get on airplanes or try a new restaurant is because the FAA regulates safety to make sure that airplanes aren't falling out of the sky. And because the USDA regulates food safety so that we know that that new restaurant meets certain minimal standards before we ever walk in the door. Like, that actually unleashes capitalism effectively. And right now in the state, we don't regulate for safety around education. We have no accountability standards that actually apply. We should apply similar standards to every school. We should make sure that if you've proven you can't run a good school, you should never get the opportunity to open a new one on public dollars, whoever you are, DPS or charter. And we should make sure that we're putting systems in place that make sure that Arlyssa has the same chance of getting her child into school A as I do. Like, regardless of whether one of us is well connected to that school or principal or not.
And so for the past 7 to 8 years, we have seen a succession, a long line of state-appointed emergency managers to run Detroit public schools. But the governor, Karen McPhee, as special advisor to the governor has come up with a new plan that he hopes will be approved by the House and Senate. This plan would call for a Detroit Education Commission to serve as sort of the overall umbrella, the organization that would manage schools, charter, public, private, in the city of Detroit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and thank you. That idea really originated out of the coalition work. Originally, when leaders within the community came together and said, what are the critical issues? No mother should have to, navigate a system with that much chaos. I mean, that's just, life's hard enough, right? I mean, to have to manage those kinds of things. But yes, the governor really said, 18 months ago, this needs to be the last emergency manager. We will not build a strong city unless we have a good, solid school district. Sort of the part and parcel of every strong community. And he had a couple of goals in that. Certainly one was to relieve the debt and take care of that debt so that we could have a new Detroit school district emerge that had immediately tremendous additional resource to invest in kids and classrooms. But the other side of that was, what are we going to do about this accountability piece? What are we going to do about stabilizing this piece? And I think it really was really great work on the coalition that said we need some entity that takes a look at that. And that was an idea that I think was very attractive to the governor. It started to be called the commission, the Detroit Education Commission, where an entity, not a school board, but an entity that had broader just oversight on a couple of issues would take a look at both accountability from a quality standpoint and then just market stability. Do we have schools where we have kids? Are they high-quality schools? So we have to have choice where we have families and children, and those should be all high-quality choices. That was really the part, those are the two big cornerstones of the governor's plan. And now we'll kind of watch the Senate and the House versions proceed forward. There's been great testimony certainly on the Senate side. We assume that we will be moving into that in the House side as well, and we'll remain very, very engaged in those conversations as they move forward.
Well, perhaps one person that you should enlist is Clark Durant. Not only is he president of the new Common School Foundation, but those who know Detroit know Clark Durant as a man who has put his money where his heart is, and that is in the children of Detroit. He founded the Cornerstone Schools many years ago, and I can tell you that recently one of his high school graduates was accepted to Harvard University on a full scholarship. And so he has done perhaps what I think Detroit Public Schools should also try to do. I don't know how you've done it, but you have taken some of the same students, and Arlyssa, one of your older children actually attended Cornerstone Schools for a while.
Sure did.
You have taken students from Detroit and somehow transformed them into the kind of students that we expect from anywhere in the country.
Well, I think there are two things that are important. The first thing is, Arlyssa is very interesting because, first of all, I was very honored that you chose Cornerstone for your son. You're also one of the parents that forced us to rethink opening up a high school. Because when your son was with us, we only went to the 8th grade, and we just said there are too many parents who are saying, Clark, Ernestine, can't you open up a high school? So thank you for that, and thank you for trusting your son to us. I think there are two things that we should look at. The first is, I always say, why can't poor kids have the same ability to make choices as rich kids, and for the same kinds of opportunities? If you look at what do rich people spend a lot of money on, and where do they send their schools, and what are the elements of those schools that we ought to allow to be created in all kinds of neighborhoods? So that if you go and find, for example, the best teacher, you don't look at, are you technically certified? If Ken Burns is going to come and teach a course on the Civil War, hire him. If you can find somebody who's a retired, I have a man who has an engineering degree from the University of Michigan. He has an MBA from Notre Dame, and we can't put him in the classroom. There are all sorts of people who could be fabulous teachers and provide new hope for these kids and give them a vision for their life. But again, if you want to dramatically, and I'm really grateful that Arlyssa has mentioned this issue of parents not having choices. The landscape would change overnight, if Karen would go back to the governor and say that every poor child, every child in this city could have an Uber card with drivers certified by the state, let them be certified by the state, but give these kids the chance to go to any school, and excellent schools of Detroit should be telling people, here are the great schools. You are not limited by boundaries. You are not limited by geography. You should be able to choose what is best for your child. And if you give that parent that tool, John Ricolta, who's a part of the coalition that we are on, John went and followed a mother and her two children. He showed up at her door at 6:15 in the morning and followed her all the way to school. The transportation challenges that she had, the I think it was 2 or 3 buses that she had to take for her children. I mean, this is atrocious. It's morally reprehensible. If you give poor kids the single tool that will break down every barrier, and I know some of my suburban friends don't like it when I say this, but let these kids find the best schools in the same way they can find the best grocery stores, the best housing, whatever it may be. That will change the landscape quicker than any body that says, you know, who can open, who can close. I'm all for properly certifying or notifying people that, you know, the good housekeeping seal of approval, the good school seal of approval. Dan's a tough person in terms of high standards. Let everybody know where those great schools are, but give these families the tool to make their choice meaningful.
But that also begs the question, why should a child have to leave his or her neighborhood to find those good schools? That is the problem. I don't know the solution to that, but the best educational opportunities should be where we live.
And you're absolutely right. That is, I think, the core that tears me in half a little bit. If we had quality schools where I lived, I may not be on this stage right now. If we didn't have 45 kids in a classroom where I lived, my story would be different, and so would a lot of other parents. We have plenty of choice. We have 200 schools, 95 DPS, 97 charter. We've got plenty of choice. The issue is we don't have quality choice, accessible quality choices. We need our educational services provided. Schools need to understand you're not enrolling just children, you're enrolling families.
Right.
We need to support the families that are enrolling into these schools in whichever way that's possible. We need schools to work together. We need services coordinated. And I'm gonna tell you a secret. Now, folks don't really want to admit this, but really, most parents don't care who runs the schools. What they want to know is my child safe? Are they being educated? And will they thrive there? That's what matters most to me. Will my child thrive where they are? Now, you can support who you want. I don't hold a banner up for anyone, and I'm not anti-anything when it comes to the schools, unless they're failing. But we need schools to work together, and we need it now. We can't afford this. We're losing, and we're still graduating students in the midst of the chaos. We need to end the chaos and fix the system.
And so there are several competing plans right now on the table. The Senate plan, which the governor, I think, approves, would appoint the Detroit Education Commission. He, of course, would love to appoint most of those members. The mayor would like to appoint the members himself. We also have a House version. House Republicans have also submitted a plan that would delay implementation of an elected school board in Detroit for another 8 years, and would also eliminate some collective bargaining for teachers. Now, that would put more people like engineers and reporters and anchors and scientists maybe in the classroom, but it might also eliminate the power of teachers to effectively bargain. What makes a good school? Does it require that kind of, I guess, point in, does it require teachers to have less power to have a better school? Dan Varner.
Does it require teachers to have less power to have a better school? No, clearly not. There are examples of schools. In fact, there's a charter school on the east side of Detroit, the Bog School, which is an example of a school that is teacher-led and actually is performing remarkably well a couple of years in based on our scorecard. And so we do score the performance of schools around the city. And we share that information broadly and widely with anybody who wants it. You can go to scorecard.excellentschoolsdetroit.org and look for it yourself. We even try and score private schools to the extent that we can get apples-to-apples comparisons. But more than that is necessary, and with all due respect to Clark, wonderful to resolve transportation issues, but you and Arlyssa raised the point, and one of the things that a Detroit Education Commission could do, or this entity, whatever you call it, could do is make sure that when schools open, let's assume for the moment that they're quality schools, that they actually are located in places where we need them so that you don't have to travel 40 miles to get to a high quality school, right? That's one of the functions that it would perform and why it makes sense. I want to just clarify one thing that you said. The Senate bill actually does not include such a creation either. So neither set of legislation, the House bill nor the Senate bill, currently includes the creation of that entity. You have the governor, you have the mayor, you have a broad coalition of Detroit stakeholders who have called for the creation of that entity. There are, of course, obvious concerns that folks have around how would you govern it, so on and so forth, all of which could be resolved. Like we resolve those kinds of things all of the time as a democracy, right, through democratic debate. We simply need a bill introduced, and I call on those senators and those legislators, those House members as well, representatives, to introduce a bill so that we can have a public conversation about what that entity might look like and how it might be governed effectively to ensure that it performs its functions well and doesn't overreach.
So you would approve of having a Detroit Education Commission?
Absolutely.
Managed by the governor, appointed primarily by the governor, or the mayor? Which would you prefer?
Well, I much prefer one that's appointed by the mayor, and I will tell you why.
And how long would that commission exist? In perpetuity, or only so long as we would have the next election for school board?
Oh, well, you could set that up. In answer to the second question, you could set it up either way. And perhaps one way to resolve people's concerns about it is to sunset it, right? Is to set it up and say, and let's have it automatically sunset in 5 years. If it's working really well, everybody will rise up to protect it, right? And then we can renew it for some longer period of time. Perhaps, who knows? Like that's one way that you could resolve that issue. I much prefer to have appointees, assuming that it's an appointed body, appointed by the mayor, and that is largely because one of the things that has to happen, we have to be accountable as a local community for our schools. Like the only way we feel enough responsibility to actually engage, like it's easy, frankly, to say, the state's been running DPS for the last 9 years, it's their fault, right? And it's easy for us not to get involved in helping to fix DPS because we can point the finger at the state. When we have to point the finger at ourselves because it's our responsibility and it's like we're accountable for the results that we're getting, it's a very different conversation that we have here locally. And so I would much prefer to see the mayor appoint those folks and the governor for that reason. Fundamentally, Karen and I were talking backstage before this began, it's an issue of trust. You gotta have folks in Lansing willing to trust us to govern ourselves.
But Karen, right now, in Michigan, sadly, there is a lot of distrust, especially among outstate Republicans, regarding the management of the Detroit public schools. Many of those Republicans still don't want to trust that elected officials in this city can run their own school system.
Well, I think there's, as we were talking about, I think there's a lot of lack of trust about a lot of things in the state that we battle on a lot of fronts. And You know, it is, you know, 10 months ago I was a school superintendent, and so rather new to this seat and learning about this piece, but there's a lot of things that have sort of come home to me in this DPS conversation, and one of them is that somehow in Michigan, because I think the situations that we're talking about, schools that really aren't performing well, and the chaos that parents face when they're trying to find that quality option and can they access it. That's not true just in Detroit.
That's right.
You know, we have, I think, somehow created in Michigan a system of education where we wait to fail. It's sort of a wait to fail system, and then when there's huge failure, we all step in and we want to do something differently, and we assume the people who were in place when it failed are no longer capable of managing that. And if we continue to have a wait to fail system, we'll just have a lot of failure, I think, down the road. I think your point earlier about the quality of our schools generally in Michigan, again, that's not just a DPS issue. We have a much broader challenge, I think, in the state about the quality of our schools, what parents have a right to expect, what all taxpayers have a right to expect, not just parents, but that the quality of the neighborhood school, the choice school, whatever that option is there because we have endorsed it as a state by sending it money. And I think all parents across the state have the right to expect that. And that's something we want to work toward in Detroit. We know that begins with trust. We know that begins with informed local decision making around the core issues of quality and what does that look like.
I think there are a couple of things that I think we have to go beyond the current conversation. First of all, I'm not an outstate Republican. I'm a metropolitan Detroit Republican. But I believe that the legislature ought to allow the people of Detroit now to be able to vote on their own school board, their own, whoever they want as superintendent. I think the governor, and I'm saying this with Karen in the room here, I think the governor ought to appoint as the interim emergency financial manager, someone chosen by the principals and the teachers of Detroit. It should not come from Lansing, it should come organically up from the system. But I think that the challenge is this, and this does cut across every neighborhood and every school. Every person in this room and every person up here, in one level, we're all a little bit of a hypocrite. Because we all got here today, everybody says that education is the most important thing, and it is very important. But the last time I checked, feeding, clothing, sheltering, transporting, and communicating are all things that must precede trying to be able to get to a good school. Feed, clothe, shelter, transport, and educate. Every person in this room relied on and trusted a framework that is a spontaneous order of people delivering quality day in and day out. This water bottle, when you and I opened it up backstage and other people opened it up, we trusted that what was in here, it could have killed us. But we opened it up, we didn't even look, and we drank it. When we're feeding, clothing, sheltering, transporting, and communicating with our kids, we trust a non-political way of delivering high quality, available to all sorts of people. When you think about what education is about, which is the most important thing, it's the development of human capital. It's a development of the human spirit. It's unleashing those gifts that God has given to every child. And we're trying to solve this in a highly political framework. When I was co-chairman of the academic subcommittee on the coalition that all of us were on, Karen wasn't a part of it at that time, I had a chance to meet a lot of fabulous principals within the DPS system, within the charters, but specifically within the DPS system. These are fabulous people. They are great educators. They desire the best for the students in their classroom. But their hands are tied because they're operating within a system that doesn't have the way in which feeding, clothing, sheltering, and transport get capital provided to them in money, in people, in ideas, and relationships. And on our boards we have the private school and we have 4 charters. When I'm looking for board members, now this is different, but I'm just going to say the way we go about it. I have people on these boards that would never win an election. They couldn't win an election if tomorrow they were the only candidate. But the point is, they bring to the table a commitment to these children. They bring relationships and ideas and experience that are very valuable to what we're able to do to get these kids to go to. We had, for 15 kids, we had over $2.5 million in scholarships for these kids to go to some of the finest schools. And the thing that I'm really grateful about just these last 25 years from Cornerstone, but it's true across the system. These kids are no different than kids anywhere else in Michigan. They have the same potentials, they've got the same wonderful spirit, and we trap it. And it needs to be unleashed in a conversation broader than just a political solution.
So how do we replicate the success of Cornerstone across the entire city? What do we need to do?
One of the things I think it seems to be absent more and more is the parent and community voice. We need to listen to the people that the schools actually service and enroll. First of all, services need to match the families and the students, what their needs are. Funding needs to match what the needs are. We've got all these mismatches going on. And then we've got it's such a chaotic state. One of the things that I'm afraid of, parents like me are vocal. You're gonna know what I feel. And we've got some other vocal parents, whether they're upset or they're happy, you're gonna know what they feel. But there's another group of parents out there who are just concerned about putting a roof over their heads. They have to keep food on the table. They don't have time to keep running back and forth to meetings, standing up and arguing with people. You know what they'll do? They will slowly creep across to another district and say, later with that, I'm gonna take my kids out, because the appearance is so chaotic. This has got to be resolved. It's got to be resolved. One thing I'd like to see serious consideration for more parents and/or community voice at every level of the decision-making process, whether that be Lansing, whether that be the table here locally, wherever it is, even if within a commission. I think parents and community voice needs to be represented, because who better than us can tell you what it is that we need to service our children and our families.
Have you been called to testify in Lansing at all regarding these bills?
I've been up there. I've testified before the Education Commission, but I'm sure that's coming.
I would add maybe one thing to answer your question, like what is necessary, and I would probably a small thing, but I think an important one. I just want to take issue with the way that you phrased something earlier, Huel, when you were describing the young man, I think it was, who got the full scholarship to Harvard out of Cornerstone. Like, our kids don't need to be transformed. Like, they're the same kids that exist in every corner of this country. Our kids need to be invested in healthy ways, right? Like it's just about unlocking their potential. It's not, there's nothing wrong with our kids. What's wrong,
and I
know you didn't mean it that way.
I wasn't implying that.
I know, but I think it's important to say that. Like, there's nothing wrong with our kids. What's wrong is with our school system, our public education system in this state. That's what needs to be transformed, not the kids. So it's a small, but I think an important distinction. The other thing that I would say, so we need wraparound services. So it's also no secret, the student population in Detroit is largely a low-income student population.
That's right.
And to think that those kids don't need more than other kids coming from middle-income backgrounds or high-income households is a farce. Like, we should figure out how, as a state, I would argue, and as a community, to invest more deeply in kids who need it more. That's just, to me, common sense. And many, many other states around the country actually use a weighted funding formula so that kids who need more money actually get, like, more money follows those kids to those schools, so that those schools are better able to provide the additional resources necessary. The other thing that I would offer, though, is, in addition to wraparound services and some policy fixes like that, is we need to invest in our teachers.
Absolutely.
Much differently, like way better than we currently do right now. There is no substitute. Like, we have all individually had the experience of being in a classroom with a teacher who you just loved, right? Who actually made chemistry or physics or whatever interesting, right? When you never in a million years thought that could be fun. We need more of those folks. And we have many teachers for whom, like, they're already at that place. We have many others who are not yet at that place. And many of them can get there, but we have to invest in them differently. And we've got to equip our schools with the ability to invest in teachers The same way that we expect teachers to differentiate among students and offer Johnny one thing and Ralph another thing, like our teachers need to be invested in at an individual level by school leaders. And our school leaders need to be invested in at an individual level so that they can achieve the level of greatness that's required in order for them to actually give our kids what we're talking about.
So when you say invest, do you mean they need raises? They need to be paid more? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, in part, they've got to be paid more. So it is, to me, teaching is one of the most honorable professions that a person can be called to do, right? And we should figure out how to invest in our teachers in a way that reflects that fact. And we have to hold folks, frankly, accountable. These are public funds. So we've got to hold folks accountable for delivering that level of performance too. But absolutely, we've got to figure out how to invest more in teachers.
And to reduce class sizes as well.
Particularly where the science tells us it matters. We know in the early years, in 7th grade, it may be fine to have a classroom of 30 kids. You would produce the right amount of conflict, debate among ideas and so on. But we know at kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, like early childhood education, small class sizes matter tremendously to outcomes. And we also know that they matter more for kids growing up in low-income households than they do for kids growing up in high-income households. So if we're going to figure out how to lower class size in particular places, they should be lowered in lower grades, particularly in schools where you see high levels of student population coming from low-income households.
Is the measure of success admittance to college only? And I ask that in light of our modern world. This wonderful thing we call the internet is fabulous. It has made our world so convenient, but it is also destroying jobs in every industry. It is limiting opportunity in some segments of society while growing opportunity in others. Should modern schools become essentially training grounds for the new world in which we find ourselves, for the world in which some opportunities will no longer be present, but others will be?
Absolutely, I believe so. When you think back, folks back in the old days would always talk about, hey, whatever happened to wood shop, or whatever happened to all of those programs? What about, some kids are good at, somebody might want to be a mechanic. Somebody may be good at plumbing. What about all of those trades? Everybody is not going to do the 4-year or the 2-year colleges or the 4-year university. My oldest son definitely fits in this category. He graduated in 2013, totally unprepared. He needed so many remediation courses when he first went. He had to sit out a semester because he could not keep up. Now he's back at it again, the second attempt. But what I've noticed is this. Those kids, 17 to 25, who are out of school at this point, who did not make it to college for whatever reason, they've come back in my neighborhood. And guess what? They're not working. What are we going to do with them? You know what that means. Eventually, something's going to start happening. So we've got to be deliberate and serious about this, because not only what we're producing affects just students and the schools, it affects the communities, because these kids eventually circle back around, and by the time 19, 20, 21, 22 hits, and Jamal hasn't found anything to do, we might be looking at Jamal on Fox 2.
So perhaps then, technical training to prepare students not only for college, but also for technical opportunities that may not require a college degree.
That's right.
Well, there's no question that there needs to be more individualized, I'm just going to call them career pathways, that can meet the different passions, gifts, skill sets of kids. And in point of, we just formed, Cornerstone did a partnership with Deloitte. And we are creating career pathways. We call it the Deloitte Cornerstone Career Pathway. We are re-engineering our whole scope and sequence. We're starting as early as the 5th grade, and we're doing that so that we can meet needs and get kids exposed much sooner. But the system, this highly politicized system, works against that. You take, for example, assessments. When I was president of the State Board of Education, and we were listening to testimony on the reading and math standards and all the testing and assessment that would come for that. And I didn't frankly want to sit in on this, but the superintendent at the time, Arlyssa, said, Clark, you asked me to take this position, you got to listen to this testimony. At the end of 2.5 months or whatever it was, and listening to all of this, I went into Art and I said, first of all, thank you for forcing me to do that. But I'll tell you the thing I learned. it's all not relevant to the success of kids. It's relevant to somebody who might be a math expert. It might be relevant to somebody who's a reading expert, but it is not designed to assess the ability of a child to be successful in a whole series of different things. And we have built a multi-million-dollar process of assessment that is not relevant to the outcomes for kids' lives. But that's what politics forces you to, in some cases, to the lowest common acceptable denominator, because it's the most politically acceptable. And if you want exactly what we're talking about here, to give kids more opportunities, then you've got to let the dynamic work. For example, I'm going to get in trouble with this. If the whole university system has really become a scam, because what it's doing is it's inviting kids in, it's loading them up with debt, and not one of these universities is accountable for the outcomes of these kids, and then the kids have all this debt. They've gotten the money, and these kids have to pay it off. And there's no accountability for these universities. Now you work it back into the K-12 system. Their graduation rate shouldn't be the standard. What's that in connection to a fulfilling life? It ought to be tied to, sure, let me find out if in technical skills, maybe it's in the trades, whatever it may be, but maybe I'm going to be an astronaut. But if I have this experience exposed to these different companies that want to give internships to kids, starting in the ninth, as we do it, we start them in the 9th grade with these internships, all of a sudden some student is going to say, wait a minute, I want to go down this pathway. But the system doesn't allow that kind of flexibility because it's holding all these people accountable for things that aren't relevant, in many cases, to the outcomes and the success of kids' lives.
I want to jump in on that a little bit, too. I would argue that some of that is changing. And I know, so we don't want to get into a debate about the Common Core state standards, but the new set of standards that have been adopted by many, many states across the country do focus more on skills like critical thinking and comprehension and so on than on being able to regurgitate, the quadratic equation, which is the kind of stuff that the standards were holding us to when we were coming up through school.
Which I've never used in life. But
exactly. Right? So to Clark's point, these standards have for a long time forced us to learn things that weren't necessarily relevant for all of us. I think those standards are changing in a good way. And you see a fair amount of differentiation among states. Some states are adopting them, some states are not, to start to put us on that path. That's one. The second thing I would say is this. Let me say 3 things. So the second thing I would say is, part of what has to be done is that school has to be made relevant for kids, right? So when kids get engaged in education, when you feel like, oh, this is interesting to me, you participate in school, you engage in school at a different level. And so we need lots of different options. I mean, there's diversity in school options matters immensely, because I may figure out in 10th grade that I'm actually interested in being an astronaut, and lo and behold, here's a school over here that's focused on aeronautic engineering or whatever it is, right? Aerospace engineering. And so it's more relevant. I will find that more interesting given my interests. That is true, and there are all sorts of programs, whether it's Clark's, which I'm really proud of, or the Linked Learning Detroit work or what have you, that are thinking about how, in particular at high schools, you can build out themes and that are built around industry sectors or pathways or career pathways or what have you, that make school more relevant for kids. So I think some of that work is going on now, and I'm relatively optimistic about the direction we're headed in that regard. The third thing I would say is this. Every child should have the option, should be able to get to a school that is good enough to prepare them to go to college if that's what they ultimately want to do. So if you decide, right, so here's the thing. Who's going to decide what kids get tracked into what? It better be the kids.
Exactly.
That's my point, right? So every kid should have an opportunity to get to a school that allows them to go to college if that's what they want to do, or whatever. So their K-8 experience, if we assume that is the paradigm, should be good enough to send them to a high school that is college prep, or good enough to send them to a high school that is career prep.
But here's the thing. The solution may be in a closer association between business and education. You know that when CompuWare was built, go ahead,
Yeah,
Karen.
I absolutely agree. And I really want to echo what Dan said, because the worst thing we could do right now, and I think we may be close to it as a state, is we're going to swing a pendulum all the way back to very finely tuned career paths for children. And I don't think that's good for kids. I think school ought to be about opening doors, not closing doors. And I think it ought to be about putting kids on highways, not in cul-de-sacs. And every time we narrow a kid's career focus, we put them on a cul-de-sac. So partnerships with business and industry, they awaken kids' knowledge of what's possible. It opens doors for them. Jobs and careers and industries that they could not have contemplated were out there. And they need a variety of experiences in that world to see how then what they're learning at school is relevant to that work. I don't think academics or career training is an either or. I think it's a both and every child deserves robust career exploration and a chance to figure out what your passions are, and a really strong academic foundation. Because you just don't know when life is going to change on a dime. And a child growing up now is going to have to retool their skills over and over and over again. And if they don't have that fundamental academic background, they're not going to have the confidence they need to go back and retool when life says retool. I will never forget this, because I was an ISD superintendent at the time when we were negotiating with the automakers through the bailout. And one of the things on the table was, were they going to close 2,000 dealerships around this nation, I think was one of the conversations. And I remember waking up that morning and going, oh my goodness, what are all those auto mechanics who were narrowly trained for one career path going to do the next day? Would they have the confidence to go back and retool because life had changed on a dime for them? We can't afford to while any child but what we think their career path should be. We need to open every door.
But you know, while I agree with what Karen says, what we really have is a system of cul-de-sacs. I mean, let's really be honest. What we've done is we have set kids on a track that in many cases, for exactly what Arlyssa said about so many of these kids, they're put on to a dead end, a cul-de-sac. I think the other piece, though, if you think about success in life, and anybody in this room or anybody up here, there are really three elements to it that is not, you want the academic, I get that, and all the rest of it, but there are three things that I think that lead to success. The first is character. I have hired, and everybody else has hired all sorts of people. You are looking for men and women, young men and women of real character. Will they work hard? Can they overcome obstacles? Will they do what they say they will do? Will they acknowledge mistakes? Will they say, I was wrong, I'm going to fix it? Those attributes of character are literally number one. Number two, there's no question, relationships. Relationships count. And the more kids can get exposed to more relationships, to build friendships, that strangers become friends, it happens all the time. And then the third thing is, you're going to laugh, but when I was in high school, my principal would let me skip class, and I went up and down my little village, and I was selling advertising, cold call selling advertising. Those experiences as a high school kid.
Where did you go to school?
I'm not telling. Those experiences, though, of knocking on the door, trying to sell my little advertising here, I'm still wearing my blazer, my white shirt, and my blue tie.
Not the same
But
one.
the point is, yeah, that's larger, that's the problem. But the point is that if you give kids experiences beyond the classroom, so that they can deal with people in the ordinary course and daily life and work, you're giving them foundational things that people in larger organizations would love to have, young men and women who have those three attributes.
And that is the role business must play in education. The same way that Deloitte has come into Cornerstone, we must have businesses coming into public schools in Detroit.
Absolutely.
Opening doors, offering opportunity, showing kids what they can do in the classroom and beyond the classroom, telling them that this is what you need to know, this is what you need to do to achieve the kind of success that we have right here.
And I just wanted to share, right now my son is at the Bach School. And one of the things that it has completely transformed his life. My son, we went from him thinking he was stupid and a dummy to writing the first 2 letters of his name because he read slower than everybody else, to now he's moved on to, Mom, I want to be a scientist. The school is so teacher developed. That's a good place to put your hands, right? Hands together. The school is so teacher developed. But you know where he discovered himself in? In all of the passions. They call their extra classes passions. He discovered himself in the passions through artwork. They've done videos. There's science classes outside. They go to winter camp for class. You know, all of these things help to build my son. Children need to be built not just in the homes, but the education system needs to build up our children so they can discover what it is that they are called to do. Whatever that is, every child deserves that.
That's right.
Amen.
That's right.
Arlyssa, you've said it all. You have said it all. We thank you so much for your attention. Please talk to these people. They have a wealth of knowledge and experience that you need to hear, not just in the 50 minutes we have here, but Clark, Arlyssa, Karen, Dan, thank you so much. And thank you. Let this be the foundation of something bigger and better, because Detroit will not come back without a fully functioning Detroit public school system. Thank you.